The text message arrived at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. The kind of autumn day when frost still clings to the windows and the world feels brittle with cold. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Boston, nursing my first coffee of the day, when my phone buzzed with a notification from my son. I smiled reflexively before I even read it, that automatic maternal response to any contact from your child, no matter how old they become. The smile died on my lips as the words registered. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, I need to be honest with you. Rachel and I have decided to keep the wedding intimate. Just close friends and her family. I hope you understand. We'll celebrate with you another time. My hands went numb. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp onto the tile floor. I read it again, certain I must have misunderstood. But no, the words remained stubbornly unchanged. My son, my only child, was getting married in 3 weeks, and I wasn't invited. My name is Eleanor Walsh, and until that morning, I believed I understood my place in the world. I was 63 years old, a widow of 2 years, a retired literature professor, and the mother of a successful 34-year-old architect named Marcus. My husband David had passed from pancreatic cancer, a swift and merciless disease that took him from diagnosis to death in just under 4 months. The grief had been devastating, but Marcus had been there throughout, holding my hand at the funeral, helping me sort through David's belongings, calling every Sunday without fail. Or so I had thought. I sat frozen at that kitchen table for what might have been minutes or hours, watching the steam rise from my forgotten coffee until it went cold. The October sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors David and I had refinished together 20 years ago. Everything in this house held memories, layers of life lived and love shared. And now my son was creating the most significant memory of his life, and I would be absent from it. I tried calling him. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again an hour later with the same result. By early afternoon, I'd left 3 messages, each one attempting to sound calm and understanding, while my voice betrayed the tremor of confusion and hurt. Finally, around 3 o'clock, he sent another text. I know this is hard, but Rachel's parents are paying for everything, and they want to keep it small. It's not personal, Mom. It's just logistics. Logistics. My exclusion from my son's wedding was a matter of logistics, like seating arrangements or catering choices. I stared at those words until they blurred, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't merely disappointment or hurt feelings. This was a revelation about how my son viewed me, how little space I occupied in what he considered the important moments of his life. The next 2 days passed in a fog. I moved through my routines mechanically, teaching my Tuesday evening community literature class at the local library, without retaining a single word of our discussion about Virginia Woolf. I watered my plants, prepared meals I didn't eat, and lay awake at night replaying every interaction with Marcus over the past year, searching for signs I had missed. Rachel Thompson had entered Marcus's life 18 months ago, at some architectural conference in Chicago. She was 28, ambitious, from a wealthy pharmaceutical family in Connecticut, and I had met her exactly 3 times. Each meeting had been brief and awkward, with Rachel offering polite smiles while checking her phone frequently, and Marcus seeming perpetually anxious to move on to the next activity. I had attributed this to young love's natural absorption in each other, never imagining it reflected a deliberate distancing from me. On Thursday evening, I received a phone call from my younger sister, Patricia, who lived in Seattle. She was the only family I had left besides Marcus, our parents having passed years ago. Patricia had always been the blunt one, the sister who said what needed saying regardless of social niceties. I just heard, she said without preamble. Marcus's wedding. Eleanor, please tell me you're not actually accepting this. I had told her about the text in a moment of desperate need to share my confusion with someone. Now her outrage on my behalf brought tears I'd been suppressing for days. What choice do I have? I managed. He's made his decision. His decision is cruel and inexcusable, Patricia shot back. You don't exclude your mother from your wedding. You just don't. And this nonsense about it being Rachel's parents' wishes? That's cowardice. He's letting them dictate terms and hiding behind their money. Something in her fierce certainty penetrated the fog of my hurt. You think it's really about money? About them controlling things because they're paying? I think it's about power and control, Patricia replied. And I think you need to consider what this means for your future relationship with Marcus. If he's willing to exclude you from his wedding, what else will he exclude you from? Grandchildren's birthdays? Holiday celebrations? Every event where Rachel's family takes precedence? After we hung up, I sat in David's study, surrounded by his books and papers that I still hadn't fully sorted through. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, a scent I'd kept alive by occasionally spraying his favorite bottle into the air, preserving this ghost of his presence. I found myself talking to him as I often did in this space. What should I do? I asked the empty room. What would you tell me to do? David had always been the practical one, the problem solver who approached emotional crises with the same methodical care he brought to his work as a civil engineer. He would have told me to step back, to gain perspective, to stop reacting and start thinking strategically. And so I tried. I pulled out a notebook and began writing down facts, separating them from feelings. Marcus had become increasingly distant over the past year. His Sunday calls had dwindled to brief text exchanges. His visits home had dropped from monthly to quarterly. When David died, Marcus had been attentive for about 6 weeks before his presence became sporadic again. He had introduced me to Rachel only 3 times in 18 months, and each meeting had felt performative rather than genuine. The pattern was undeniable once I laid it out in black and white. My son had been systematically removing me from his life, and the wedding exclusion was merely the most dramatic manifestation of a longer process. The question was why, and more importantly, what I was going to do about it. I spent that weekend in a strange state of heightened clarity. The initial shock had burned away, leaving something harder and more focused in its place. I wasn't angry exactly. Anger felt too hot, too reactive. What I felt was a cold determination to understand the truth of my situation and respond in a way that honored both my dignity and my love for my son, however misguided that love might have been. On Monday morning, I made several phone calls. The first was to my financial advisor, a competent woman named Sharon Kowalski, who had helped me navigate the complexities of David's estate. I asked her for a complete review of my financial position, every account, every asset, every investment. She seemed surprised by the urgency but agreed to have a comprehensive report ready within a week. The second call was to a travel agent, a somewhat old-fashioned choice in the age of online booking, but I wanted someone who could handle complex arrangements without requiring my constant input. I told her I needed to leave the country for an extended period, possibly 3 to 6 months, with departure as soon as possible. She asked about destinations, and I surprised myself by requesting a list of long-term rental options in several European cities: Florence, Barcelona, Vienna, and Prague. The third call was to my department head at the community college where I still taught 1 evening class per semester. I explained that I needed to take a leave of absence for personal reasons. Given that I was essentially a volunteer at this point, teaching for the love of literature rather than financial need, this was easily arranged. By Tuesday afternoon, I had a plan taking shape. Sharon had confirmed what I already knew. David's careful planning and our modest but comfortable lifestyle had left me financially secure. The house was paid off, his life insurance had been substantial, and our retirement accounts were healthy. I could afford to vanish from my current life for an extended period without financial strain. The travel agent called back Wednesday with options: a furnished apartment in Florence's Oltrarno district, available immediately on a 6-month lease. The photos showed tall windows overlooking terracotta roofs, a small balcony with trailing jasmine, rooms filled with that peculiar European light that artists have chased for centuries. I authorized the deposit without hesitation. I didn't tell Marcus about any of this. He sent 2 more texts during that week, both brief and generic. "Hope you're doing okay, Mom. Things are crazy with wedding prep." I responded with equally brief acknowledgments, matching his energy precisely. If he noticed the shift in my tone from hurt confusion to neutral politeness, he didn't mention it. The wedding was scheduled for November 7th. I booked my flight to Florence for November 5th, 2 days before Marcus would stand at an altar somewhere without his mother present. I told myself this timing was practical rather than symbolic, but I knew better. I wanted to be gone before the wedding, unreachable, removed from the orbit of his life just as he had removed me from this pivotal moment. Patricia called again the week before my departure. "You're really doing this? Just leaving?" "I'm taking a trip," I said calmly. "I've always wanted to spend extended time in Italy, and now seems like the perfect opportunity." "The perfect opportunity being your son's wedding that you're not invited to," she said dryly. "Eleanor, I support you completely, but let's not pretend this is just a vacation." "It's not pretend," I replied. "It's perspective. I can stay here and marinate in hurt feelings, or I can use this as an impetus for something I've been postponing. David always wanted us to spend a winter in Europe. We never did because of work obligations, his health, one excuse after another. Now I have no excuses left." "What are you going to tell Marcus?" "Nothing," I said. "If he asks where I am, I'll tell him."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But I'm not announcing my travel plans in advance. I'm simply living my life just as he's living his. The days before departure were filled with practical tasks that kept deeper emotions at bay. I arranged for a neighbor to check on the house periodically. I set up automatic payments for utilities. I packed 2 large suitcases with a combination of practical clothing and a few special pieces, including a silk scarf David had bought me in Paris years ago, and never seen me wear because I was always saving it for a special occasion that never came. I was folding sweaters into my suitcase when I noticed an envelope tucked into David's drawer, one I must have missed during previous sorting sessions. My name was written on it in his distinctive architectural handwriting, precise and elegant. Inside was a letter dated 3 weeks before his death. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've given yourself time to grieve properly. But I also hope you're beginning to look forward again, to consider the life you'll live without me in it. I know you, my love. You'll want to shrink your world to make it smaller and safer. You'll focus on Marcus, on being the perfect available mother, on filling the void I've left with excessive care for others. Please don't. Marcus is a grown man with his own life to build. You raised him well, and now you must let him make his way while you make yours. There's an account I never told you about, a separate investment I made years ago with money from a consulting project. It's grown considerably, and it's entirely yours, meant for exactly this kind of moment. The details are with Sharon Kowalski. Use it for something bold, something just for yourself. Travel. Study. Write that book about Victorian literature you've always talked about. Whatever calls to you, but do it lavishly, without guilt, without thinking of it as selfish. You spent 37 years being half of us and you did it beautifully. Now be fully yourself, whoever that turns out to be. I love you enough to want that for you more than I want to be selfishly missed. All my love, David." I sat on the edge of our bed, tears streaming down my face as I read his words twice more. How like David to plan for my emotional well-being even beyond his death, to anticipate my patterns of self-abnegation and try to redirect them. And how perfect that I was discovering this letter now, just as I was taking my first uncertain steps toward exactly the kind of bold action he would have encouraged. I called Sharon immediately. "There's an account David mentioned in a letter. He said you have the details." "Ah," she said, a smile evident in her voice. "Yes. I've been wondering when you'd ask about that. It's been waiting for you." The amount she named made me sit down abruptly. David's secret investment had grown to nearly $400,000, a sum that transformed my comfortable security into something approaching genuine wealth. With this added to our existing assets, I could live anywhere, do anything for years without financial concern. "He gave me instructions," Sharon continued. "The account transfers to you with only one condition. You have to spend at least half of it on yourself within the first 2 years. Not on Marcus, not on charity, not on practical necessities. On yourself for experiences or pleasures or pursuits that bring you joy. It's actually written into the trust structure." He was quite insistent about that. I laughed through my tears, imagining David's determination to force me into self-indulgence, even from beyond the grave. That sounds exactly like him. "He loved you very much," Sharon said quietly, "and he worried about you becoming too small after he was gone. He wanted to make sure you had the means to stay large, to keep expanding rather than contracting." That night, I raised a glass of David's favorite whiskey in the study and spoke to his absence once more. You always did know me better than I knew myself. Thank you for this. I promise I'll use it the way you intended. I'll be lavishly, unapologetically myself. My flight departed Logan Airport at 8:15 in the morning on November 5th. I had sent Marcus a single text the previous evening. Leaving town for a while. We'll be traveling. Hope the wedding is beautiful. His response came 2 hours later. Oh, okay. Where are you going? I didn't answer. I turned off my phone's international service, keeping only Wi-Fi capability for emergencies. I wanted to be genuinely unreachable, not simply ignoring calls but actually beyond the normal channels of contact. The flight to Rome with a connection to Florence gave me 13 hours to sit with my decision and question whether I was being mature or merely running away. Both probably. But running away began to seem less like cowardice and more like strategic retreat, a necessary withdrawal to gain the perspective required for whatever came next. I arrived in Florence on the evening of November 6th, jet-lagged and disoriented but immediately enchanted by the city's beauty. The taxi from the airport wound through narrow streets barely wide enough for vehicles, past buildings the color of sun-baked clay and burnt umber, until we reached my building in the Altrarno district. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, accessed by stone stairs worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. My landlady, a woman named Signora Alberti who appeared to be in her 70s, greeted me with warm enthusiasm and rapid Italian that I could barely follow despite my theoretical knowledge of the language. She showed me through the apartment, pointing out features and explaining systems with grand gestures that transcended language barriers. The space was exactly as pictured. High ceilings with exposed beams, terracotta floors, a small kitchen with a window overlooking an interior courtyard, and that glorious living room with tall windows facing the street and rooftops beyond. After Signora Alberti departed, I stood at those windows and watched the November light fade over Florence. Somewhere across the Atlantic, final preparations were underway for a wedding I wouldn't attend. Marcus would be having dinner with Rachel's family, perhaps, or handling last-minute details. Was he thinking of me? Did my absence register as anything more than a minor inconvenience? A potential awkward question from guests about why his mother wasn't present. I unpacked methodically, hanging clothes in the ancient wardrobe, arranging my toiletries in the surprisingly modern bathroom, setting up my laptop on a desk positioned to catch the morning light. Among my packed items was a journal, a beautiful leather-bound book Patricia had given me years ago that I'd never written in because I was waiting for thoughts worthy of its elegant pages. I opened it now and wrote a single sentence. Today I chose myself. The next morning, November 7th, I woke to church bells and golden light streaming through sheer curtains. For a moment I was disoriented, forgetting where I was, and then it all came back. Florence. My escape. And today the wedding. I made coffee in the small mocha pot provided in the kitchen, following Signora Alberti's demonstrative instructions from the previous evening. The ritual of grinding beans, filling the pot, watching the dark liquid bubble up into the upper chamber, gave my hands something to do while my mind wrestled with the emotional reality of this day. I had imagined I would be devastated this morning, crushed by the weight of exclusion and loss. Instead, I felt oddly detached, as if I were observing my life from a comfortable distance. Perhaps this was dissociation, or perhaps it was simply the effect of being in a completely new environment where normal reference points didn't apply. I took my coffee to the small balcony and watched the street below come to life. A man in an apron swept the sidewalk in front of what appeared to be a bakery. Two elderly women stopped to chat, their conversation animated with gestures. A young couple passed, wrapped in each other, oblivious to the world beyond their bubble of intimacy. The wedding would be starting in about 6 hours, accounting for the time difference. A small ceremony, Marcus had said. Just close friends and Rachel's family. I wondered how he would explain my absence to guests who asked. Would he say I was traveling? That I was ill? Or would he simply avoid mentioning me at all, let people assume whatever they wanted? I spent the day walking. Florence in November was quieter than the peak tourist season, with fewer crowds at the major sites and more space to breathe. I wandered without particular destination, letting the city reveal itself gradually. I crossed the Ponte Vecchio with its jewelry shops, walked along the Arno River, got deliberately lost in the maze of streets around Santa Croce. In a small church whose name I never learned, I sat in the back pew and let myself cry quietly. Not the racking sobs of deep grief, but a gentler release of everything I'd been holding in. I cried for the mother-son relationship I had thought we had but apparently didn't. I cried for David and all the years we didn't get to have. I cried for the version of myself who had existed just 2 weeks ago, who had believed she understood her place in the world. An elderly priest noticed me crying and approached with concern, speaking in Italian. I managed to communicate that I was fine, just emotional, and he nodded with understanding and patted my shoulder gently before moving on. Even this small kindness from a stranger moved me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. By evening, the wedding would be over. Marcus would be married, and I would still be here in Florence, having not witnessed the moment. The permanence of that struck me as I sat in that church. I could never get that moment back, could never reclaim my place in that particular memory. Whatever relationship Marcus and I reconstructed from this point forward would be built on the foundation of this absence. I returned to the apartment as twilight settled over the city. I had purchased bread, cheese, olives, and wine from a small shop near Santa Croce, and I arranged this simple meal on the small table by the window. As I ate, I imagined the wedding reception would be in full swing now. The toasts, the first dance, all the traditional moments I had pictured myself witnessing. My phone, connected to the apartment's Wi-Fi, buzzed with a notification. A photo on social media, though I had carefully avoided looking at Marcus or Rachel's accounts. This was from a friend of mine, someone who didn't know about the wedding situation, sharing a post that had appeared in her feed. One of Rachel's friends must have posted it, and the algorithms had carried it into my orbit despite my intentions to avoid such things. The photo showed Marcus and Rachel at what appeared to be their reception. She was beautiful in a simple, elegant gown. He was handsome in a well-tailored suit, and they were laughing at something, their faces radiant with happiness. It was the kind of perfect wedding photo that appears in magazines, everything lit with golden warmth and promise. I stared at that photo for a long time, examining my feelings. I expected pain, jealousy of those who had been included, rage at the exclusion. Instead, I felt a strange sense of finality. This was real. He had done this, and I had survived it. I was sitting in a beautiful apartment in Florence, eating good food, drinking wine, and the world had not ended. I posted no comment, offered no like, left no trace of having seen the photo. Instead, I closed the app and opened my journal. I wrote about the day, about the church, about the kindness of the priest, and the beauty of the city and the surprising resilience I was discovering within myself. I wrote until my hand cramped and the wine bottle was empty and the streets below had gone quiet. That night I slept deeply, and when I woke the next morning, November 8th, I felt something shift. The wedding was over. That chapter had closed. Now came the question of what I would build with my unexpected freedom. Over the following weeks, I settled into Florence like water finding its level. I enrolled in an intensive Italian language course that met every morning, surrounding myself with other expats and travelers seeking to deepen their connection with the city. I wandered museums and churches in the afternoons, often with a book, reading Dante in Italian with a translation guide to help me through the archaic passages. I made friends slowly at first and then with increasing ease. There was Julia, a British woman about my age who was spending 6 months in Florence while recovering from her own divorce. There was Antonio, the owner of a wine bar near my apartment who took it upon himself to educate me about Tuscan wines. There was a group of international women who met weekly for dinner, calling themselves the Florentine Society, though there was nothing formal about our gatherings beyond showing up and sharing food. Marcus sent occasional messages. The first came 3 days after the wedding. Thanks for the congrats message. Wedding was great. When are you back? I had sent no congratulations message. I responded with careful neutrality. Glad it went well. Not sure about return timeline. Enjoying my travels. His next message came a week later. Where are you exactly? Been trying to call but it goes straight to voicemail. I'm in Europe. Phone service is complicated. I'll call when I can. I didn't call. I was establishing a new equilibrium, one where I wasn't immediately available, wasn't centered on his needs and schedule. It felt simultaneously selfish and necessary, like learning to breathe with lungs that had forgotten how to fully expand. Patricia called via Wi-Fi every week, and I told her about my adventures. My language class, the small trattoria where I'd become a regular, The day trip I'd taken to Siena. She listened with approval and occasional worry. Marcus is asking me where you are, she told me during one call. He seems confused about why you're not more responsive. I'm living my life, I said simply. That's all. I'm not punishing him or playing games. I'm just not making him my priority in the way I used to. Good, Patricia said firmly. It's about time. As weeks turned into a month and then two, I began to notice something interesting. The quality of Marcus's messages changed. The initial casual inquiries gave way to something more concerned. Mom, are you okay? Is something wrong? Why aren't you answering properly? I responded to these with the same measured neutrality. I'm fine. Just busy with my own life for a change. Hope you and Rachel are settling into married life well. But I could sense confusion turning into worry, casual contact attempts becoming more frequent. By mid-December, he was messaging every few days, his tone shifting from puzzled to frustrated. I don't understand what's going on. You're acting weird. Can you just call me and have a real conversation? I could have called. I could have explained my hurt, my sense of exclusion, could have had the confrontation that clearly needed to happen. But something in me resisted. I wasn't ready. I was still in the process of becoming whoever I was going to be in this new configuration of my life, and I knew instinctively that engaging with Marcus before that process was further along would mean slipping back into old patterns. Christmas approached, and with it an interesting dilemma. Marcus sent a message in early December. Obviously you'll come back for Christmas, right? We're doing it at Rachel's parents' place in Connecticut. Her mom wants to meet you properly. The presumption was breathtaking. After excluding me from the wedding, they now expected me to show up for Christmas at the home of the people whose preferences had supposedly required my absence from their daughter's wedding. The logic was so twisted I almost laughed. I'm staying in Florence through the holidays, I responded. You and Rachel should enjoy your first Christmas as a married couple with her family. The response came quickly. You're not coming home for Christmas? Mom, this is ridiculous. Whatever you're mad about, we need to talk about it like adults. Whatever I'm mad about. As if he had no idea. As if the exclusion from his wedding was some minor slight rather than a fundamental rupture in our relationship. I'm not mad, Marcus, I wrote back. I'm simply living my life. Enjoy the holidays. Send my regards to Rachel and her family. After that, I turned off Wi-Fi notifications for a few days. Christmas in Florence was magical. The city decorated with lights and filled with a festive energy that transcended language barriers. I spent Christmas Eve at a dinner hosted by Julia, surrounded by expats and locals, eating traditional Italian dishes and singing carols in 3 languages. On Christmas Day, I attended Mass at the Duomo even though I wasn't particularly religious, drawn by the beauty of the ritual and the soaring music. I thought of David throughout those days, feeling his presence in small ways. The way afternoon light fell across ancient stones. The taste of good wine shared with friends. The quiet pleasure of beautiful architecture and art. He would have loved this, loved seeing me here, confident and independent and expanding into the space his death had left behind. I sent Marcus a single message on Christmas morning. Merry Christmas. Hope you're having a wonderful day with your new family. He didn't respond until 2 days later. Your new family? What's that supposed to mean? Why are you being like this? I didn't answer. I had said what I needed to say, had communicated the reality of the situation as I understood it. He had chosen Rachel's family over his own mother. That was his right, but it came with consequences he was only beginning to grasp. January brought cold rain to Florence and a sense of renewal to my life. I had been gone 2 months, and the distance had clarified so much. I began writing in earnest, returning to an academic project I'd abandoned years ago. A book exploring the ways Victorian women writers had carved out space for themselves in a world designed to exclude them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I worked in cafes and libraries, my Italian improving enough to order coffee without hesitation and chat with shopkeepers about the weather. I took a weekend trip to Bologna with Julia, and we spent 2 days eating incredible food and wandering through medieval streets. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, maybe decades. Marcus's messages became less frequent but more pointed. Are you ever coming back? Are you moving to Italy permanently? I feel like you've just abandoned me. The last part almost made me laugh aloud. He felt abandoned. The The projection was so complete, so lacking in self-awareness, that I barely knew how to respond. I haven't abandoned you, Marcus, I wrote finally. I've given you exactly what you indicated you wanted. Space from your mother. I'm respecting the boundaries you established by not inviting me to your wedding. I'm simply living my own life, which seems to be what you preferred I do. This produced a phone call, the first one I'd answered since leaving the States. His voice came through with crystal clarity, frustrated and confused. Mom, what are you talking about? The wedding was just a size thing, not about you. We wanted to keep it tiny. Yet somehow Rachel's entire extended family made the cut, I replied calmly. Interesting definition of tiny. Silence. Then, her parents were paying for it. They got to decide the guest list. And you let them exclude your mother without protest, I said. That told me everything I needed to know about my place in your priorities. I'm not angry, Marcus. I'm simply adjusting my expectations accordingly. This is insane, he said, voice rising. You're punishing me by disappearing to Europe and refusing to engage like a normal person. I'm not punishing anyone, I replied, my voice steady. I'm living the life I want to live. You made clear that I'm not essential to the major moments of your life. That's fine. It's your choice. But it means I'm free to make my own choices about how I spend my time and energy. Mom. His voice cracked slightly. Come on. Don't be like this. Like what? Independent? Self-sufficient? I thought those were virtues. No, like cold and distant and passive-aggressive. I'm not being passive-aggressive, Marcus. I'm being actively disengaged. There's a difference. We went in circles for another 15 minutes before I finally ended the call, emotionally exhausted. I hadn't wanted confrontation, but perhaps it had been necessary. At least now he couldn't claim ignorance about why I had left. February brought more messages, these with a new tone of distress. Rachel's pregnant. We just found out. You're going to be a grandmother. I stared at those words for a long time, feeling a complicated swirl of emotions. Joy at the prospect of a grandchild. Sadness that this announcement came via text while I sat alone in a foreign country. Worry that this child would grow up barely knowing me, would be absorbed into Rachel's family just as Marcus had been. That's wonderful news, I responded finally. Congratulations to you both. When are you due? August. Listen, Mom, this changes things. We need you to be part of this kid's life. Can you come home so we can talk properly? Need was doing a lot of work in that sentence. They needed me now that a baby was coming. Needed the free childcare and emotional support grandmothers traditionally provide. But they hadn't needed me for the wedding, hadn't needed my presence or blessing for that foundational moment. I'm happy to be part of the baby's life, I wrote back. But I'm not rushing home. We can discuss arrangements closer to the due date. For now, take care of Rachel and enjoy this exciting time. More protests followed, more messages insisting I was being unreasonable, that I needed to stop this nonsense and come home. I responded to each one with the same calm neutrality, refusing to be drawn into extended arguments or justifications. I was learning that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for how I chose to live my life, not even my son. In March, the situation escalated. Patricia called with worry clear in her voice. Marcus called me. He's really spinning out, Eleanor. He says Rachel's having a difficult pregnancy, lots of morning sickness and complications. He's overwhelmed and asking when you're coming back to help. Is the pregnancy actually complicated? I asked. Or is it just normal pregnancy discomfort that seems overwhelming to first-time parents? I don't know, Patricia admitted. But he sounds genuinely stressed. Rachel has parents, I pointed out, and presumably health insurance and access to doctors. I'm sure they'll manage. You're really not going back? Not yet, I said. Maybe not for a while. Pat, I've built something here. I have friends, routines, a life that's mine. For the first time since David died, maybe for the first time since Marcus was born, I'm fully myself. I'm not ready to give that up to rush back and play the role of supportive grandmother when I wasn't considered worth including as mother of the groom. I get it, she said softly. I do. Just be prepared for this to get uglier before it gets better. She was right. In late March, I received an email from Rachel for the first time. The subject line read, "We need to talk." The message was longer and more emotional than anything Marcus had sent, describing the difficulties of her pregnancy, her fears about becoming a mother, how overwhelmed they both felt. Then came the key paragraph. I know you're upset about the wedding. Marcus finally told me everything about how it went down. I'll be honest, Eleanor. My parents pushed hard for a small wedding, and I was dealing with my own family drama at the time. It got out of hand, and by the time I realized Marcus's mom wasn't on the list, things were too locked in to change. I should have insisted. I'm sorry, but we need you now. Please come home. Your grandchild needs you. The apology was something I supposed, but the framing was interesting. My parents pushed hard. Not we chose to exclude you. Things got out of hand, as if my exclusion was an accident of circumstance rather than a decision. And then the emotional appeal, your grandchild needs you. I wrote back carefully, taking time to craft a response that was honest but not cruel. Rachel, I appreciate the apology. I understand that weddings can be complicated with family dynamics and competing pressures. What hurt wasn't just the exclusion itself but how it was handled. A text message, with no discussion or acknowledgement of how significant it was. And then the months of Marcus acting confused about why I was upset, as if my feelings were unreasonable. I'm excited about the baby. I look forward to being a grandmother. But I'm not returning to the States immediately. I've built a life here that's meaningful to me. And I'm not abandoning it to rush back into a role I wasn't valued in before. When the baby comes, we'll figure out how I can be involved in ways that work for everyone, including me. Take care of yourself in the pregnancy. The morning sickness does get better for most women by the second trimester. Best, Eleanor. This produced an immediate phone call from Marcus, his voice tight with frustration. Are you kidding me right now? Rachel is reaching out, apologizing, and you're still being stubborn about staying in Italy? I'm not being stubborn, I said tiredly. I'm living my life. Rachel's apology was appreciated, but it doesn't change the fundamental issue. You both excluded me from a major life event and now expect me to drop everything when it's convenient for you. It's not about convenience, Marcus shot back. It's about being a grandmother, being family. The silence that followed that phone call stretched for 3 weeks. No messages from Marcus, no emails from Rachel. Just quiet that felt both liberating and unsettling. I continued my life in Florence, my Italian improving to the point where I could read novels slowly and have genuine conversations beyond tourist necessities. Spring arrived with sudden warmth, the city blooming with wisteria and roses, tourists returning in greater numbers as Easter approached. I had been in Florence for nearly 5 months when I received an unexpected message from a number I didn't recognize. The area code was Connecticut, and the message was brief. Mrs. Walsh, this is Diane Thompson, Rachel's mother. I'd like to speak with you if you have a moment. My number is below. I stared at that message for a long time, debating whether to respond at all. Rachel's mother, the woman whose preferences had supposedly required my exclusion from the wedding, now wanted to speak with me. The audacity was remarkable, or perhaps it was desperation. Either way, curiosity won out over caution. I called the number that evening, and Diane Thompson answered on the second ring. Her voice was cultured, carefully modulated, the kind that came from expensive schools and country club memberships. Mrs. Walsh, thank you for calling back, she began. I realized this must seem strange, but I felt we needed to speak directly, woman to woman, about the current situation. What situation is that? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Rachel's pregnancy has become complicated, Diane said, and I heard genuine worry beneath the polished surface. She's been hospitalized twice for severe hyperemesis gravidarum. The morning sickness never stopped, and now she's dealing with dehydration and malnutrition. She's lost 15 pounds instead of gaining weight. I felt a pang of concern despite everything. Hyperemesis was serious. Not the normal discomfort of pregnancy, but a potentially dangerous condition. I'm sorry to hear that. Is the baby all right? So far, yes, but Rachel is struggling terribly. And Marcus is frankly falling apart. He's trying to work while running to the hospital constantly, managing Rachel's care, dealing with insurance companies. My husband and I have been helping, but we both have our own health issues that limit how much we can do. I see, I said carefully. And you're calling because? Because Marcus needs his mother, Diane said bluntly. And because I realize now that excluding you from the wedding was a mistake. A significant mistake that I take responsibility for. This was unexpected enough that I sat down. Go on. Diane took a breath. I pushed hard for a small wedding. My husband and I were paying, and we wanted to control costs after some financial setbacks in our business. But it wasn't just about money. Rachel is my only daughter, and I had very specific ideas about what her wedding should be. I was controlling and dismissive of other people's needs, including yours. Marcus tried to push back initially, but I made it clear that if he wanted our financial support, things would be done my way. So you blackmailed my son into excluding me from his wedding, I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. Yes, Diane said simply. That's exactly what I did. And I've watched the consequences of that decision unfold over these past months. Marcus is carrying tremendous guilt. Rachel is sick and stressed. And you're on another continent rightfully angry and disengaged. I'm calling to apologize and to ask if there's any way to repair this situation before it's too late. I walked to my window, looking out over the Florentine rooftops turning golden in the evening light. Part of me wanted to hang up, to reject this appeal just as I had been rejected. But another part, the part that had been a mother for 34 years, felt the pull of concern for Marcus and the coming grandchild. I appreciate the apology, I said finally. And I'm glad you're being honest about what happened. But you should understand something, Diane. I didn't leave the country just because I was angry about the wedding. I left because the wedding exclusion revealed a pattern in my relationship with Marcus that I needed to step away from. I had made him the center of my world, and he had come to take that for granted. The wedding was just the clearest example. I understand, Diane said quietly. And I'm not asking you to rush back and sacrifice everything you've built for yourself. I'm asking if there's a way you might consider being more available, more present, as we navigate this difficult pregnancy and prepare for the baby. Not as a servant or a convenience, but as Marcus's mother and this child's grandmother. What does Marcus say about this? I asked. Does he know you're calling me? No, Diane admitted. He'd probably be furious if he knew. But I've watched him these past weeks, and I see a man who desperately misses his mother, but is too proud and confused to know how to say it. He keeps talking about you, about things you used to do together, memories from his childhood. He shows Rachel photos of you. He's lost Eleanor, and I think part of that lostness is because he destroyed his relationship with the one person who always centered him. I felt tears prick my eyes despite my best efforts to remain detached. He told me I was being cold and passive-aggressive. He accused me of punishing him. He's scared, Diane said. Scared of being a father, scared of losing Rachel to this illness, scared of admitting he made a terrible mistake. Men often turn their fear into anger, especially at the people they need most. We talked for another 30 minutes, and by the end, I had a clearer picture of the situation. Rachel was genuinely struggling with a difficult pregnancy. Marcus was overwhelmed and exhausted. Diane and her husband were trying to help, but were limited by their own health challenges. And in the middle of all this chaos was a baby due in 4 months who would enter a family fractured by pride and hurt feelings. I need to think about this, I told Diane finally. I'm not making any promises about returning immediately, but I'll consider what role I might be able to play from here, and what conditions would need to be met for me to consider coming back. That's all I'm asking, Diane said. Thank you for hearing me out. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, not bothering to turn on lights. My perfect Florentine retreat suddenly felt complicated by the pull of family obligation and concern. I had built something precious here, had reclaimed a sense of self I'd lost somewhere in the years of being primarily Marcus's mother and David's wife. But I was still a mother, and my son was struggling, and a grandchild was coming who would need whatever wisdom and love I could offer. I called Patricia, needing her clear-eyed perspective. She listened to my summary of Diane's call without interrupting, then said, "What do you want to do? Not what you think you should do, but what you actually want." I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to stay here and let them figure it out on their own. That's probably the part still angry about the wedding. But another part is worried about Marcus and Rachel, and wants to help if I can do so without losing myself again. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Patricia pointed out. You could offer support without rushing back to be a full-time caretaker. You could set clear boundaries about what you're willing to do and what you're not. You could be a grandmother without becoming the default childcare solution. How do I do that when Marcus has never respected my boundaries before? By being willing to enforce consequences when he crosses them, Patricia said. You've already shown you can do that by staying in Florence this long. The question is whether you're ready to maintain that strength while also allowing some reconnection. I thought about David's letter, about his instruction to use his secret fund for bold experiences and self-focused living. Staying in Florence was certainly that. But so was choosing to engage with a difficult family situation on my own terms rather than running away from it. Both required courage, just different kinds. Over the next few days, I drafted a letter to Marcus. Not a text or an email, but an actual letter on beautiful stationery I'd purchased from a shop near the Duomo. I wrote it by hand, working through multiple drafts until I had captured exactly what I needed to say. Dear Marcus, I began. I've been thinking a great deal about where we are and how we got here. I owe you some clarity about my feelings and intentions, and I owe myself the same. When you excluded me from your wedding, you broke something fundamental in our relationship. Not just my heart, though that was certainly broken, but my assumption that I held a secure place in your life. You told me through your actions that I was not essential to your most important moments, and I believed you. So I adjusted accordingly. I didn't leave for Europe to punish you or to prove a point. I left because I needed to remember who I am beyond being your mother. For your entire life, and especially after your father died, I made you my primary focus. Your needs, your career, your happiness became the measure of my own success and worth. The wedding exclusion forced me to recognize how unhealthy that had become, for both of us. I've spent these months in Florence becoming reacquainted with Eleanor Walsh, not Eleanor the mother or Eleanor the widow, but simply Eleanor. I've discovered I like her. She's braver than I knew, more capable of independence, more willing to prioritize her own needs. I don't want to lose her again. I know Rachel's pregnancy has been difficult, and I'm genuinely sorry for that. I know you're struggling and feeling overwhelmed, but I want you to understand that I cannot, and will not return to being the mother who sacrifices everything for your convenience. If we rebuild our relationship, it will be on different terms, with genuine mutual respect and recognition of boundaries. I'm willing to be your mother and your child's grandmother, but those roles will look different than perhaps you expected. I will not provide unlimited free childcare. I will not always be available at a moment's notice. I will not make your family the sole center of my life. I have my own life now, my own interests and friendships and pursuits, and those matter just as much as yours do. If you can accept these terms, if you can treat me as an autonomous person rather than a resource to be utilized, then we can find our way back to each other. But that requires genuine acknowledgement of what happened and real change in how you view and treat me. I love you. I always have and always will. But love alone isn't enough to sustain a healthy relationship. We also need respect, consideration, and the willingness to see each other clearly, including the parts that are difficult or inconvenient. I'll be in Florence through June. After that, I'm considering several options, including possibly extending my stay or exploring other destinations. We can discuss how I might be involved with the baby closer to Rachel's due date, but any arrangements will need to work for me as well as for you. With love and clear boundaries, Mom, I mailed the letter from the Central Post Office, watching it disappear into the international mail system with a mixture of relief and apprehension. There was no taking it back now. No softening the message or cushioning the hard truths. Marcus would receive it in a week or so, and then the ball would be in his court. In the meantime, I continued my Florentine life with renewed appreciation for what I'd built. Julia and I took a weekend trip to Cinque Terre, hiking between the coastal villages and eating pesto that tasted like concentrated summer. Antonio invited me to a wine tasting at his bar, where I learned to distinguish between different Chianti regions by taste alone. I made progress on my book about Victorian women writers, finding unexpected parallels between their struggles for autonomy and my own. 2 weeks after mailing the letter, I received a phone call from Marcus. I almost didn't answer, but something in me was ready for this conversation. "I got your letter," he said without preamble. His voice was rough, as if he'd been crying or hadn't slept. "I've read it about 20 times. And?" I asked, my heart pounding despite my outward calm. "And you're right. he said, the words coming out in a rush. About all of it. I took you for granted. I let Rachel's family push you out because it was easier than standing up to them. I expected you to always be available, whenever I needed you without considering what you might need. I've been a terrible son. I felt tears start but kept my voice steady. You haven't been a terrible son, Marcus. You've been thoughtless and self-centered, which is different. But yes, you've hurt me deeply, and you haven't fully acknowledged that until now. I know, he said. God, Mom, I know. And the worst part is that I didn't even realize what I'd done until you left. I just kept thinking you were overreacting, that you'd get over it. It took you being gone for months for me to understand that I'd actually damaged our relationship, maybe irreparably. Not irreparably, I said softly. But damaged, yes. And it will take time and effort to repair, from both of us. I'll do whatever it takes, Marcus said. I'll respect your boundaries. I'll treat you like the autonomous person you are. I'll stop expecting you to drop everything for me. Just please don't give up on me completely. We talked for over an hour, the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. Marcus told me about the fear he'd been carrying, about feeling inadequate as a husband and soon-to-be father, about how overwhelmed he felt by adult responsibilities. I told him about my months in Florence, about discovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed, about the importance of maintaining my independence even as I remained his mother. Can I ask, Marcus said near the end of the call, is there any chance you might come back before the baby is born? Not to take care of everything, just to be present. I want my kid to know their grandmother, and I want you to be part of this from the beginning. I'm planning to return in July, I said, about a month before Rachel's due date. But Marcus, you need to understand that I'll be coming back to the States, not necessarily to Boston. I'm considering several options for where I might settle next. You're not coming home? The disappointment was clear in his voice. I'm not sure Boston is home anymore, I said honestly. The house is full of memories of your father, and I'm not sure I want to go back to living in that space. I might sell it. I might keep it and rent it out. I might find somewhere completely new. I'm still deciding. But you'll be close enough to visit? To be part of the baby's life? Yes, I assured him. I'll be accessible, but on terms that work for both of us. We'll figure out what that looks like together, with real communication and mutual respect. After we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not healed exactly, but moving toward healing. Marcus had finally acknowledged the hurt he'd caused, had taken real responsibility rather than deflecting or minimizing. It was a beginning, however fragile. Over the next weeks, our communication found a new rhythm. Marcus sent updates about Rachel's improving condition, her hyperemesis finally subsiding as she entered the third trimester. He asked about my life in Florence with genuine interest rather than performative politeness. He sent photos of the nursery they were preparing, asking my opinion on colors and furniture in a way that suggested he actually valued my input. Rachel reached out as well, her messages more thoughtful than before. She told me about reading books on pregnancy and parenting, about her fears and hopes for motherhood. She asked questions about what it had been like for me when Marcus was born, showing interest in my experience as a mother rather than just seeking my services as a grandmother. In May, I received an unexpected package from Marcus and Rachel. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound photo album, and when I opened it, I found it filled with pictures from the wedding I hadn't attended. But these weren't just random snapshots. They had carefully selected photos and added handwritten captions explaining each moment. "This is where we should have had you standing during the ceremony," read one caption next to a photo of the altar. "This is the toast we should have asked you to give," read another beside a photo of the reception. Each caption was an acknowledgement of my absence, a recognition of what had been lost by excluding me. On the last page was a photo of Marcus and Rachel from the reception, and beneath it, Rachel had written, "We can't undo the mistake we made, but we can acknowledge it and do better going forward. We love you, Eleanor, and we want you to be part of our family, fully and truly. We'll spend the rest of our lives proving that to you if you'll let us." I called them both, tears streaming down my face. "The album is beautiful," I managed. "Thank you for acknowledging what happened, for not pretending it didn't matter." "It mattered," Marcus said firmly. "It was the biggest mistake I've made, and I'll never stop being sorry for it. We talked about my return to the States, making concrete plans now. I would fly back in mid-July, about 6 weeks before Rachel's due date. I would stay in a hotel initially while I looked for an apartment in the Boston area. Something small and manageable that felt like mine rather than a repository of memories. Marcus and Rachel offered to help me apartment hunt, to be involved in the process rather than having me figure it all out alone. I want to be clear about expectations, I said. When the baby comes, I'll be available to help in reasonable ways, but I'm not providing full-time childcare. You'll need to arrange for actual childcare for when you both return to work. We understand, Rachel said. We've already started researching nanny services and daycare options. We want you to be grandma, not an unpaid employee. And I need you both to respect that I have my own life, I continued. I'm planning to continue working on my book. I want to keep traveling, maybe return to Florence for a month or 2 next spring. My world can't revolve entirely around you and the baby. We get it, Marcus said. And honestly, Mom, seeing you become this independent person who prioritizes herself has been good for me. It's made me realize how much I took advantage of your constant availability. I don't want to do that anymore. In June, I began preparations for leaving Florence. It was bittersweet, packing up the apartment that had been my sanctuary for 7 months. I had transformed here, had found parts of myself I thought were lost. The city had given me space to grieve, to rage, to heal, and finally to choose engagement with my family from a position of strength rather than desperation. Signor Alberti helped me pack, chattering in Italian that I could now mostly understand. She told me I looked different than when I'd arrived, younger somehow, more alive. I told her Florence had given me exactly what I needed. You come back, yes? She asked, and I promised I would, though I didn't know exactly when. My last week in Florence was filled with farewells. Julia and I had a final dinner at our favorite trattoria, promising to stay in touch and perhaps meet up in London or New York. Antonio gave me a bottle of his best wine to save for a special occasion. The women from our weekly dinners threw me a small going-away party, each one sharing what my friendship had meant to them. On my final night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the lights of the city sparkle below. I thought about the woman who had arrived here 7 months ago, devastated and confused, believing she had lost everything. That woman had been so focused on what she'd lost, on the rejection by her son, that she couldn't see what she might gain. Now I was returning to face the complications of family and the demands of new grandmotherhood, but I was returning as someone different. Someone who knew her worth, who had proven she could build a life entirely on her own terms, who would never again make herself small to accommodate others' needs at the expense of her own. I raised my glass to the Florentine sky. Thank you, I whispered, to the city, to David's memory, to whatever forces had conspired to bring me here. Thank you for giving me back to myself. The flight from Florence to Boston, with connections through Rome and New York, gave me nearly 20 hours to transition between the life I was leaving and the one I was returning to. I spent much of it writing in my journal, trying to capture everything I'd learned and experienced before the memories became too distant to hold their full texture and meaning. Marcus met me at Logan Airport, and when I saw him waiting at arrivals, I was struck by how different he looked. Older, certainly, worry had added lines around his eyes, but also somehow more present, more substantial, as if 7 months of struggle had forced him to grow into a fuller version of himself. When he hugged me, it felt different than it had in years. Not the perfunctory embrace of obligatory family contact, but genuine connection, relief at my return. You look amazing, he said, holding me at arm's length to really see me. Italy obviously agreed with you. It did, I agreed. But it's good to be back, good to see you. Rachel wanted to come, but she's having a low-energy day, Marcus explained as we walked to his car. The pregnancy has been easier the past month, but she still has tough days. We drove to a hotel in Cambridge where I'd booked a room for 2 weeks while I apartment hunted. Marcus carried my bags up, and we sat in the small sitting area of my room, suddenly awkward now that the reunion moment had passed. I don't really know what to say, Marcus admitted. I've been rehearsing this moment for weeks, but now that you're actually here, all my prepared speeches seem inadequate. You don't need speeches, I said. We just need honesty and time. We're rebuilding, Marcus. That doesn't happen in one conversation or one afternoon. I know, he said. But I want you to know I've been working on myself. I started seeing a therapist after we had that long phone call in April. We've been talking about my patterns, about how I relate to people, especially you and Rachel. About entitlement and boundaries and how to be a better son and husband and soon father. This surprised me, pleased me. That's significant work, Marcus. I'm proud of you for taking it seriously. I had to, he said simply. I almost lost you. I almost destroyed the most important relationship in my life because I took it for granted. I can't let that happen again. We talked for another hour, making plans for apartment hunting, for dinner with Rachel, for all the practical details of reintegrating me into their lives. When Marcus left, he hugged me again, holding on a beat longer than usual. I really am glad you're back, Mom, he said. And I'm so sorry for everything that led to you leaving. I know, I said. And Marcus, I'm not sorry I left. It was exactly what I needed. What we both needed, I think. Over the next 2 weeks, I fell into a new pattern that felt both familiar and strange. I had coffee with Marcus and Rachel several times, conversations that were more genuine than any we'd had before. Rachel showed me ultrasound photos and talked about her fears of childbirth and new motherhood with a vulnerability she hadn't displayed before. Marcus included me in decisions about the nursery and asked my advice about practical baby gear in a way that suggested he actually wanted my input rather than just going through the motions. Diane Thompson was nothing like I had imagined. I'd built her up in my mind as some imperious society matron, all cold elegance and dismissive superiority. The woman who met me at a quiet bistro in Newton was smaller than I expected, dressed simply in slacks and a cardigan, with kind eyes that showed genuine remorse when she greeted me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said as we settled at a corner table. "I wasn't sure you would after everything." "I'm curious," I admitted. "Your phone call in March changed something. I want to understand who you are beyond the villain role I'd assigned you." Diane smiled ruefully. I probably deserved the villain role. I was awful about the wedding, truly awful. I've spent months regretting it. Over lunch, she told me her story. She and her husband Richard had built a successful pharmaceutical distribution company over 30 years, but a series of bad investments and a lawsuit from a former partner had damaged their finances significantly. The wedding had come at a time when they were trying to maintain appearances while privately struggling, and Diane had responded by becoming controlling and rigid about costs. "I told myself it was about money," she said, "but really it was about control. I was losing control of so many things in my life, the business, our retirement plans, even my health. I have early-stage Parkinson's, nothing severe yet but enough to scare me. So I grabbed onto Rachel's wedding and controlled every detail I could. Including who was invited," I said quietly. "Including that," she agreed. And I told myself I was protecting Rachel, keeping things intimate and manageable. But the truth is I was being selfish and small-minded. I saw Marcus's family as competition rather than addition, especially you as the mother who might have opinions or wants that conflicted with my vision. Her honesty was disarming. "Did you know how much it would hurt him to exclude me?" "I suspected," Diane said, looking down at her hands. "But I convinced myself he'd get over it quickly, that you'd understand, that it wasn't really that significant in the grand scheme of things. I was wrong on all counts." "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked. "Because Rachel deserves better from me," Diane said. "She's about to become a mother, and I don't want her learning from my example of how to treat family. And because Marcus deserves to have his mother in his life without the poison of my interference. But mostly because you deserve an honest apology from the person actually responsible for what happened." We talked for nearly 3 hours, and by the end, I understood Diane not as a villain but as a frightened woman who had made terrible choices under pressure. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it in a way that made forgiveness possible. "I hope we can build something better going forward," Diane said as we prepared to leave. "Not just for the kids and the baby, but because I think we might actually become friends if we give it a chance. Let's start with friendly," I suggested, "and see where it goes from there." Apartment hunting proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. Everything I looked at felt either too much like trying to recreate what David and I had built together, or too impersonal and sterile. I was ready to extend my hotel stay when my realtor showed me a converted warehouse space in the South End. An open loft with exposed brick and enormous windows that flooded the space with light. It's completely different from what you described wanting, the realtor said apologetically. But it just came on the market and something about it made me think of you. The moment I walked in, I knew she was right. This space had no connection to my previous life, no memories of David or Marcus's childhood. It was blank slate territory, waiting for me to define what it would become. The bedroom was separated by sliding barn doors rather than walls, the kitchen was sleek and modern, and there was enough space for a proper office area where I could work on my book. "I'll take it," I said, surprising both myself and the realtor. Marcus and Rachel came to see it before I signed the lease, wanting to make sure I was certain. They walked through the empty space, and I could see Marcus struggling with something he wanted to say. "It's really different from the house," he finally managed. "Different from anything you've ever lived in." "That's exactly the point," I said. "I'm different now. I need a space that reflects who I'm becoming, not who I was." Rachel understood immediately. "It's perfect for you. I can already imagine you here, writing at that window, hosting dinners with your Florence friends when they visit." We spent an afternoon shopping for furniture, and I let myself enjoy their company without the weight of resentment that had colored our earlier interactions. Rachel had opinions about area rugs and lighting that were actually helpful rather than intrusive. Marcus carried furniture catalogs and took measurements with genuine enthusiasm. It felt like the beginning of something new, something healthier than what we'd had before. The move-in happened in early August, just 2 weeks before Rachel's due date. Friends from Florence sent housewarming gifts, including Julia, who shipped a case of wine from our favorite Tuscan vineyard. Patricia flew in from Seattle to help me unpack and arrange furniture, and she stood in the middle of the loft when we finished, nodding with approval. "This is brave," she said. "Starting completely fresh at 63. David would be proud of you." "I think he would," I agreed, looking around at the space that was entirely mine, chosen by me, reflecting my current taste and needs rather than decades of accumulated compromise. Rachel went into labor on August 23rd, 3 days before her due date. Marcus called me at 2 in the morning, his voice tight with controlled panic. "It's happening. We're heading to the hospital. Can you meet us there?" I arrived at Mass General 45 minutes later to find Marcus pacing the waiting area, while Rachel was being evaluated. Diane and Richard arrived shortly after, and the 4 of us settled into the strange limbo of waiting for new life to enter the world. The labor was long and difficult. Rachel's hyperemesis had left her weakened, and the delivery stretched into its 15th hour before the medical team began discussing the possibility of a cesarean section. Marcus was in the delivery room, but he came out periodically to update us, looking more exhausted and frightened with each appearance. "She's so tired," he said during one update, tears in his eyes. "She's been pushing for 2 hours and nothing's happening. They're saying maybe another hour before they make the call about surgery." I hugged him, this man who was still my little boy in so many ways. "She's stronger than you know, and the doctors won't let anything happen to her or the baby. Trust the process." Diane sat nearby, looking small and worried. She caught my eye and I saw real fear there, the terror of a mother watching her child suffer. I sat down next to her and took her hand without saying anything, and she gripped it tightly, grateful for the connection. 20 minutes later, a nurse came out with a huge smile. "We have a baby. A girl, 7 pounds 4 ounces, perfectly healthy. Mom did great, everyone's doing great." The relief was overwhelming. Richard cried openly, Diane sobbed against my shoulder, and I felt tears streaming down my own face. A granddaughter. I had a granddaughter. They let Marcus come get us after Rachel had been cleaned up and moved to recovery. She looked exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink hospital blankets. Marcus stood beside her, looking stunned and awed and completely transformed. "Mom," he said, gesturing me forward. "Meet your granddaughter. We'd like you to meet Charlotte Eleanor Walsh Thompson." I moved closer, looking down at the impossibly small face peeking from the blankets. Charlotte Eleanor. They'd given her my name. This precious new person who represented fresh starts and second chances. "Hello, Charlotte," I whispered. "I'm your grandma. I've been waiting to meet you." Rachel smiled tiredly. "We wanted to honor you. After everything, after how badly we messed up, we wanted you to know how much you mean to us. How much we want you to be part of her life." I held Charlotte for the first time, feeling the weight of her tiny body in my arms, and something fundamental shifted in my chest. This was what mattered. Not the hurt of the past or the grudges I could choose to carry, but this child who would grow up knowing or not knowing me based on choices I made from this point forward. Over the next few days, I found myself at the hospital frequently, bringing meals for Marcus and Rachel, sitting with them during visiting hours, holding Charlotte while Rachel rested. Diane was there often too, and we developed an unexpected partnership, two grandmothers navigating our roles with more grace than either of us had shown in the past. When Rachel and Charlotte came home from the hospital, I maintained the boundaries I'd established. I visited several times a week but didn't move in to help. I held the baby and offered advice when asked, but I didn't take over or insist on my way of doing things. I was present but not consuming, helpful but not intrusive. Marcus noticed and appreciated it. "Thank you for respecting our space," he said one afternoon when I was preparing to leave after a 2-hour visit. "A lot of grandparents would have just moved in and taken over. That wouldn't be good for any of us," I said. "You and Rachel need to find your rhythm as parents. I'm here to support that, not to interfere with it." The book I'd started in Florence was progressing well, and my publisher was interested in seeing a full draft by early next year. I worked on it most mornings in my loft, surrounded by the light pouring through those enormous windows, feeling more creatively energized than I had in decades. I also maintained my connections to Florence. Julia and I video chatted every few weeks, sharing updates on our lives. Antonio sent me photos of new wines he was featuring at his bar. The women from our dinner group created a WhatsApp thread where we shared recipes and travel photos, and kept our friendship alive across distances. In October, Rachel asked if I'd be willing to watch Charlotte one afternoon a week, so she could attend a new mother's support group. I agreed, and those Thursday afternoons became precious time, just my granddaughter and me, learning each other's patterns and preferences. I sang to her the same songs I'd sung to Marcus decades ago. I read her board books even though she couldn't possibly understand the words yet. I walked her through my neighborhood in her stroller, pointing out architectural details and telling her stories about the city she'd grow up in. One Thursday in early November, almost exactly a year after the wedding I hadn't attended, I was rocking Charlotte to sleep when Marcus stopped by unexpectedly. He'd taken the afternoon off from work and wanted to talk, he said. We sat in my loft's living area, Charlotte asleep in my arms, and Marcus pulled out his phone. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling up a video file. "This is from the wedding." Rachel's cousin filmed it on her phone because we didn't hire a videographer, trying to keep costs down. I tensed, unsure I wanted to see footage of the day I'd been excluded from, but Marcus continued. "Just watch this part. It's right before the ceremony starts." The video showed the small venue, guests taking their seats, Rachel's family filling the front rows. And then it showed Marcus standing at the front with his best man, looking nervous and excited and then suddenly uncertain. His eyes scanned the assembled guests, clearly looking for someone. The audio was muffled, but you could hear him say something to his best man, who shrugged and gestured vaguely. "I was looking for you," Marcus said quietly, pausing the video. "Right before the ceremony, it hit me that you weren't there, that I'd let Rachel's parents exclude my mother from my wedding. You can see it on my face the moment I realized what I'd done." He restarted the video, and I watched my son's expression shift from nervous anticipation to something like dismay. He looked around again, still searching, and then seemed to force himself to focus forward as the music changed, signaling Rachel's entrance. "I almost stopped the ceremony," Marcus said. "I almost told everyone we needed to wait, that I'd made a terrible mistake. But then Rachel was walking down the aisle and it felt too late to fix it, too late to do anything but go through with what we'd planned." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Because I want you to know that I knew," Marcus said. "Even in that moment, I knew I was making the biggest mistake of my life. And every moment of that day, every photo and toast and dance, was colored by your absence. People kept asking where you were, and I had to make up excuses, and each excuse made me feel worse." He looked at Charlotte sleeping in my arms. "I don't want her to grow up with that kind of regret. I don't want to look back on important moments in her life and realize I excluded people who mattered because it was easier or more convenient or because I was too weak to stand up to pressure." You're learning, I said gently. That's all any of us can do. Learn from our mistakes and try to do better. Will you forgive me? He asked. Really forgive me? Not just say you have but keep holding it over me? I looked at him, this man who was my son, who had hurt me deeply but who was genuinely trying to change. I forgave you months ago, I said honestly. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, Marcus. What happened changed us both, changed our relationship. We can't go back to how things were before, but we can build something new and potentially better. I want that, he said. I want to build something better with you. In December, I flew back to Florence for 2 weeks, keeping the promise I'd made to myself about maintaining my own life and interests. Marcus and Rachel were nervous about me leaving, worried about managing Charlotte on their own without grandparent backup, but they recognized my need to go. Walking through Florence's streets again felt like returning to a place of pilgrimage, a site of personal transformation that held special meaning. I stayed in a hotel this time rather than renting an apartment, but I visited all my old haunts. The wine bar where Antonio welcomed me like family. The cafe where I'd written so many pages of my book. The church where I'd cried out my grief and confusion a year earlier. I had coffee with Signora Alberti, who was delighted to hear about Charlotte and to see photos. I met Julia for dinner, and she told me about her own journey since we'd last seen each other, about returning to London and starting a new career as a tour guide for literary enthusiasts. You inspired me, she said. Watching you remake your life so completely, it made me realize I could do the same. We don't have to accept the story we think we're stuck in. On my last day in Florence, I returned to that apartment building in Oltrarno and stood outside, looking up at the windows that had been mine for 7 months. A different light shone through them now, another tenant's life being lived in that space. But it didn't matter. What I'd found there wasn't tied to the physical location, but to something internal, some courage or clarity that I'd carried with me when I left. Back in Boston for Christmas, our first as an extended family including Charlotte, we gathered at Marcus and Rachel's apartment. Diane and Richard were there, Patricia had flown in from Seattle, and the space was crowded and warm and occasionally chaotic in the way of family gatherings with an infant present. We took turns holding Charlotte, passing her around like precious cargo. We ate too much food and told stories, including, finally, honest stories about the wedding and its aftermath. Rachel's cousin who'd filmed the ceremony was there, and she admitted she'd known something was wrong. I kept thinking, where's Marcus's mom? But I didn't want to ask because it seemed like maybe it was intentional, like there was family drama I didn't know about, she said. I felt so uncomfortable the whole day. There should have been drama, Rachel said, looking at me with clear eyes. I should have caused drama. I should have insisted you be there, Eleanor, regardless of what my parents wanted or what Marcus was willing to accept. I failed you and I'm sorry. We've talked about this, I reminded her gently. We've apologized and forgiven and moved forward. Let's not spend Christmas relitigating the past. No, I think this is important, Diane interjected. All of us need to own what happened and commit to never letting something like that happen again. This family almost broke because of pride and poor choices. Charlotte deserves better from all of us. We went around the room then, each person sharing what they'd learned from the situation. Marcus talked about boundaries and respect. Rachel discussed standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Diane acknowledged the damage that comes from trying to control everything. Even Richard, quiet through most of these emotional discussions, talked about the importance of speaking up when you see something wrong happening. When it was my turn, I held Charlotte close and looked around at these people who were my family, complicated and imperfect as they were. I learned that I'm stronger than I knew, I said. I learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to build a life that reflects who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. And I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending nothing happened. It's about acknowledging the truth and choosing connection anyway. That night, as I returned to my loft, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with endings. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was fully myself while also being part of this messy, growing family. I opened my laptop and wrote the final words of my book's conclusion. A passage about how Victorian women writers had found ways to claim their voices and spaces in a world designed to silence them. How they'd used whatever tools were available, whatever opportunities presented themselves, to insist on their own importance and autonomy. I thought about those women, about their courage and creativity, about how they'd refused to be erased or diminished. And I thought about my own journey this past year, about the wedding invitation that never came and the life I'd built in response to that absence. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as losses. Sometimes being excluded from one story allows you to write a completely different one, better and truer than anything you could have imagined. I saved the document and closed my laptop, then walked to my window and looked out at the Boston night. Somewhere across the city, Charlotte was sleeping in her nursery, surrounded by parents who were learning to be better versions of themselves. Somewhere in Connecticut, Diane was probably lying awake thinking about second chances and redemption. And here in this loft that was entirely mine, I was exactly where I needed to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, a photo of Charlotte in her Christmas pajamas, eyes wide and curious. Below it he'd written, "She's going to know how amazing her grandmother is. I'll make sure of that." I smiled and set the phone aside. Whatever happened next, I would face it as Eleanor Walsh, the woman who'd chosen herself when it mattered most. The woman who'd turned exclusion into liberation, who'd transformed hurt into growth, who'd proven that 63 was not too old to start completely over. The year that had begun with a devastating text message had ended with something I'd never expected. A fuller, richer version of myself, surrounded by family who had learned to value what they'd almost lost. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. Something real. Spring arrived in Boston with the kind of warmth that felt like permission to begin again. The trees along Commonwealth Avenue burst into bloom, and the city shed its winter gray for something brighter and more hopeful. Charlotte was 8 months old now, sitting up on her own and babbling in sounds that sometimes almost resembled words. I visited her twice a week, maintaining the rhythm we'd established that honored both my presence in her life and my own independent existence. My book was finished finally, after months of writing and revising and second-guessing every word. The publisher had accepted it with enthusiasm, and we were looking at a fall release date. I dedicated it to David and to the Victorian women whose stories had given me a framework for understanding my own journey toward autonomy. One afternoon in April, I was working on final edits when Marcus called unexpectedly. His voice carried an edge of nervousness that immediately put me on alert. "Can you come over? Rachel and I need to talk to you about something." "Is everything all right? Is Charlotte okay?" "Everyone's fine," he assured me quickly. "Just can you come? It's important." I arrived at their apartment an hour later to find both of them sitting at the kitchen table, looking serious but not distressed. Charlotte was napping, and the apartment had that peculiar quiet that comes when young parents steal moments between the chaos. "What's going on?" I asked, accepting the tea Rachel poured for me. Marcus and Rachel exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then Marcus pulled out his laptop and turned it to face me. On the screen was a photo of a stunning venue overlooking a harbor, white chairs arranged in rows facing an arbor decorated with flowing fabric and flowers. "We're planning a vow renewal ceremony," Rachel said, "for our 2nd anniversary in November. And before you say anything, before you tell us it's not necessary, I need you to hear why we're doing this." I stayed quiet, waiting, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. "The wedding was wrong," Marcus said bluntly. "Not just because you weren't there, though that was the worst part. But the whole thing felt hollow. It was Rachel's parents' vision, their money, their control. We went along with it because it seemed easier than fighting, and because we didn't fully understand what we were giving up by letting them dictate everything. We want to do it right this time," Rachel continued. "Small but meaningful, with only the people who genuinely matter to us. No one gets excluded because of money or convenience, or someone else's preferences. And we want you there, Eleanor. Not just as a guest, but as an essential part of the ceremony." I felt tears starting and tried to blink them back. "You don't have to do this for me. We're not doing it just for you," Marcus said. "We're doing it for us, for our marriage, for Charlotte. We want her to grow up seeing photos of her parents' wedding day with both grandmothers standing beside them. We want to start our marriage over symbolically with the right foundation this time." "The first wedding was about appearances and meeting other people's expectations," Rachel added. "This one will be about love and family and choosing each other with full honesty about what that means. We can't undo the past, but we can create a new memory that honors what should have happened. They showed me more details. The ceremony would be in Martha's Vineyard at a small inn they'd rented for the weekend. 30 guests maximum, only the people they genuinely wanted present. They'd already talked to Diane and Richard, who had tearfully agreed to attend but not to pay for or control any aspect of the planning. Patricia was invited, along with Rachel's sister who'd been her actual maid of honor the first time, and a handful of close friends. "We want you to do a reading during the ceremony," Marcus said. "Something about love and second chances and the courage to start over when you've made mistakes. You're better with words than either of us, and it feels right that you should have a voice in our wedding, given that you're the reason we learned what really matters." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They came in waves, not from sadness but from something more complex, a mixture of grief for what had been lost and gratitude for what was being offered. Rachel moved to sit beside me, taking my hand. "I know this doesn't erase the hurt," she said softly. "Nothing can do that. But we want to acknowledge it publicly, to honor you in front of everyone we care about, and to start building the family we should have built from the beginning." "I would be honored," I managed through tears. "Truly honored." We spent the next hour talking through details, their excitement building as they described their vision. It would be casual but elegant, an afternoon ceremony followed by dinner at the inn. They wanted Charlotte to be part of it somehow, maybe held by one of the grandmothers during key moments. They planned to write their own vows, acknowledging the growth and changes they'd experienced since the first wedding. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as I was preparing to leave. He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold bracelet with a single charm, a tiny book engraved with the word courage. "We know your book is coming out in the fall," Rachel explained. "We know it's about finding your voice and claiming your space. This is to celebrate that and to thank you for modeling that courage for us. You taught us that it's never too late to choose yourself, even when that choice is difficult or unpopular." I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, feeling the weight of it, light but significant. "You've both grown so much," I said. "Not just in how you treat me, but in how you approach your lives and your marriage. I'm proud of you." Over the following months, the vow renewal became a family project in the best sense. I helped Rachel choose readings and music, offering suggestions but never insisting on my preferences. Diane and I went shopping together for dresses, both of us emotional at the prospect of getting this second chance. Patricia flew in several times to help with planning, and she and I spent long evenings talking about family and forgiveness, and the strange paths that lead us toward healing. The reading they'd asked me to prepare became something I crafted with enormous care. I wanted words that would honor their journey, acknowledge the mistakes made, and point toward the future they were building. I wrote and rewrote, testing different passages until I found something that felt true. My publisher scheduled my book release for October, just a month before the vow renewal, and I found myself busier than I'd been in years. There were interviews and readings, bookstore events, and podcast appearances. The book received thoughtful reviews, with several critics noting how the Victorian writer's struggles for autonomy resonated with contemporary challenges women still faced in claiming their full humanity. Marcus came to my first official reading at a bookstore in Harvard Square, bringing Rachel and Charlotte. Watching him in the audience, seeing his face as I read passages about resilience and self-determination, I felt a wave of love for the man he was becoming. Not perfect, still learning, but genuinely committed to growth in ways he hadn't been 2 years ago. After the reading, during the question and answer period, a young woman asked how the Victorian writers I'd studied had maintained relationships with family members who didn't support their ambitions. It was clearly a personal question, and I took my time answering. "They set boundaries," I said. "They loved their families, but they didn't sacrifice their fundamental selves to maintain peace. They learned that sometimes you have to risk relationships in order to save them, that the only way to have authentic connection is to show up as your authentic self, even when that's uncomfortable for others." Marcus caught my eye from the audience and nodded slightly, understanding that I was speaking about us as much as about long-dead writers. November arrived with crisp air and brilliant foliage. The weekend of the vow renewal, our small group gathered at the inn on Martha's Vineyard. The setting was perfect, a restored sea captain's house overlooking a protected harbor, with grounds that sloped down to the water's edge. The night before the ceremony, Rachel organized a small dinner for just family. Diane and Richard, Patricia, Rachel's parents and sister, Marcus and Rachel, Charlotte and me. It could have been awkward gathering this particular constellation of people given our history, but instead it felt comfortable, even warm. After dinner, Rachel stood and cleared her throat. I want to say something before tomorrow while it's just us. She looked around the table. 2 years ago, we got married in a ceremony that was beautiful but wrong. We let fear and financial pressure and other people's expectations shape the most important day of our lives up to that point. And in doing so, we hurt people we love. She turned to me. Eleanor, we excluded you from our wedding, and that exclusion said terrible things about how we valued you, how we prioritized appearances over authentic relationship. Tomorrow, when we renew our vows, you'll be standing with us. But I wanted to say now in front of everyone that I'm sorry. Not just for the wedding, but for every moment since then when I failed to recognize your worth and your autonomy. Marcus stood beside her. Mom, you've taught me more in the past 2 years than I learned in the previous 34. You taught me that love without respect is hollow, that presence without autonomy is suffocating, that the people we take for granted are often the ones we need most. His voice cracked slightly. You could have written me off completely after how I treated you. You would have been justified in doing that. But you gave me a chance to grow, to learn, to become a better man. Thank you for that gift. I couldn't speak past the emotion closing my throat, so I simply stood and moved to embrace them both. Around the table I saw Diane wiping tears, Patricia smiling with fierce pride, even Richard looking moved by the raw honesty of the moment. The ceremony the next afternoon was everything the first wedding hadn't been. Simple and genuine, focused on the couple rather than on impressing guests or meeting someone else's vision. The weather cooperated with mild temperatures and brilliant sunshine, and we gathered on the lawn overlooking the harbor. Charlotte, dressed in a velvet dress, sat in my lap during the ceremony. She was surprisingly calm, seeming to sense the significance of the moment even at her young age. As Marcus and Rachel stood before the officiant, I could see how different they looked from the people in that wedding video Marcus had shown me. More settled, more certain, more fully themselves. When it came time for my reading, I stood with Charlotte on my hip and read the passage I'd prepared. Love is not a fixed point but a journey, I began. It requires the courage to acknowledge when we've lost our way, the humility to ask for directions, and the strength to start over when necessary. The Victorian women I've studied understood this deeply. They knew that authentic love, whether romantic or familial, demands that we show up as our full selves, that we honor both our own needs and the needs of those we love. I looked at Marcus and Rachel as I continued. Marriage is not about perfection but about choosing each other repeatedly, especially when that choice is difficult. It's about building something together, while maintaining the individual selves that make that building possible. It's about second chances and third chances and as many chances as it takes to get it right. Charlotte grabbed at the pages I was reading from, and gentle laughter rippled through the small gathering. I shifted her on my hip and finished. May your marriage be marked by this kind of courage, this willingness to start over when needed, this commitment to growth even when it's uncomfortable. May you honor each other's autonomy while building your union. And may you always remember that the strongest foundations are built on honesty, respect, and the ability to say I was wrong, I'm sorry, let's try again. The vows Marcus and Rachel had written were beautiful in their specificity. They acknowledged mistakes made, lessons learned, growth achieved. They promised to prioritize authentic connection over appearances, to stand up for each other against external pressures, to model healthy relationship patterns for their daughter. When the officiant pronounced them married again, or perhaps truly married for the first time, the applause was genuine and joyful. Charlotte clapped her tiny hands together, mimicking the adults around her, and the sound of her laughter mixed with the cries of gulls overhead. The reception that followed was intimate and warm. Good food, better wine, toasts that were funny and moving in equal measure. Patricia gave a toast about second chances and the strength of women who refused to be diminished. Diane spoke about learning humility and the gift of forgiveness. Rachel's father, usually quiet and reserved, talked about watching his daughter become not just a wife and mother, but a woman of character and courage. When it was my turn to toast, I kept it brief. To Marcus and Rachel, I said, raising my glass. May you never stop growing, learning, and choosing each other. And may Charlotte grow up seeing a marriage built on respect, honesty, and the knowledge that love is a verb, not just a feeling. As evening fell and fairy lights strung around the garden began to glow, I found myself standing at the edge of the lawn, looking out at the harbor. Marcus appeared beside me, Charlotte asleep against his shoulder. "Thank you for being here," he said quietly. "Not just today but through all of it. For staying when you could have left permanently. For giving me the chance to fix what I broke." "You did the work," I reminded him. "I just held the space for you to do it." "I look at Charlotte," he said, stroking her hair gently, "and I think about the kind of father I want to be, the kind of man I want her to see when she looks at me. And I know that wouldn't be possible without what you taught me this past 2 years." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. I thought about the text message that had arrived on a cold November morning 2 years ago, the words that had shattered my sense of my place in the world. I thought about the woman I'd been then, lost and diminished, unable to imagine a path forward. That woman felt like someone else now, someone I'd known but had grown beyond. The journey from that morning to this evening had been painful and difficult and absolutely necessary. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed, had built a life that reflected my actual values and needs, had learned to prioritize my own well-being alongside my love for others. "Come on," Marcus said, gesturing back toward the party. "Rachel wants to cut the cake, and Charlotte will be devastated if she wakes up and misses it." We walked back together, my son and my granddaughter and me, toward the lights and laughter and the family we were still learning how to be to each other. Not perfect, never that, but honest and growing and committed to doing better. The party continued late into the evening, and I found myself dancing with Patricia, with Diane, even with Rachel's father, who admitted he'd always been terrible at dancing but was making an effort. Charlotte woke up and was passed from person to person, the center of attention and delight. Around midnight, as the gathering began to wind down, Rachel pulled me aside. "I know we've said this before, but I want to say it again now. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like. And thank you for loving Marcus enough to let him face the consequences of his actions, instead of just absorbing the hurt and pretending everything was fine. You've both worked so hard," I said. "This isn't just about forgiveness. It's about genuine change, and you've both demonstrated that in ways that go far beyond today's ceremony." "I hope Charlotte learns from our mistakes," Rachel said, watching her daughter being bounced gently by her grandfather. "I hope she grows up knowing how to set boundaries, how to demand respect, how to be fully herself even when that's difficult." "She will," I assured her, "because she'll see that modeled by her parents and her grandmothers. She'll grow up knowing that women don't have to make themselves small to be loved." The next morning, before heading back to Boston, our group gathered for breakfast at the inn. Charlotte was cranky from the late night, and the adults were moving slowly, exhausted but happy. We ate and talked and laughed, and there was an ease to it all that felt earned rather than assumed. As I was packing my car to leave, Marcus helped me load my bag and then stood by the driver's door, clearly wanting to say something more. "What is it?" I prompted gently. "I was thinking about that text I sent you 2 years ago," he said. "About the wedding, about keeping it small. If I could go back and unsend it, undo the whole thing, I would." "I wouldn't," I said, surprising us both. "Really? Really?" I confirmed. "Don't misunderstand, what you did hurt terribly, and I wish that hurt hadn't been necessary. But it forced both of us to grow in ways we desperately needed to. You learned about respect and consequences and what real love requires. I learned about my own strength and the importance of prioritizing my own life." I put my hand on his arm. "If you hadn't excluded me from that wedding, I might never have gone to Florence. I might never have written my book or discovered that I'm actually quite happy living alone, being independent, building a life around my own interests. The pain led to growth, Marcus. Not despite the pain, but because of it." He hugged me then, tight and long. "I love you, Mom. And I'm going to keep working every day to deserve your forgiveness." "You already have it," I assured him. "Now you just have to keep honoring it." The drive back to Boston gave me time to reflect on the weekend, on how far we'd all come. I thought about David and how he would have loved seeing this resolution, this evidence that his careful planning and faith in my resilience had been justified. I thought about the Victorian women whose stories I'd spent years studying, how they would have understood my journey in ways my contemporaries sometimes didn't. Back in my loft, I unpacked and then sat at my desk, looking out at the city. The bracelet Marcus and Rachel had given me caught the light, the word courage seeming to glow. I opened my laptop and started a new document, not sure yet what I was writing but feeling words gathering inside me that needed expression. I wrote about family and forgiveness, about the complicated dance between holding people accountable and offering them grace. I wrote about second chances and how they only work when accompanied by genuine change. I wrote about the year I'd spent in Florence and how geography sometimes provides the distance necessary to see clearly what's been cloudy up close. The writing flowed easily, and I lost track of time until my phone buzzed with a message from Patricia. Just got home. Best weekend in years. You were magnificent, big sister. I smiled and responded simply, we all were. Over the following weeks, I settled back into my routines. The book continued to do well, with speaking engagements taking me to other cities where I met readers who shared their own stories of late-life reinvention and hard-won autonomy. Charlotte continued to grow and change, each visit revealing new capabilities and quirks. Marcus and Rachel continued their work on building a marriage based on honesty and mutual respect. And I continued to write, to travel occasionally, to nurture friendships both old and new, to live fully into the life I'd claimed for myself. The wedding I hadn't been invited to 2 years ago had become the catalyst for the most transformative period of my life. What had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, painful but necessary. Some stories don't have simple resolutions, neat endings where everything is perfect and all wounds are fully healed. This was one of those stories, but it had something better than perfect resolution. It had growth, change, second chances seized and honored. It had a family learning to be better to each other. Individuals learning to honor both connection and autonomy. On a Saturday in December, I was reading to Charlotte in her nursery when she looked up at me and said, clear as day, Gamma. Her first real word, and it was for me. I felt tears spring to my eyes as I hugged her close. That's right, sweetheart. I'm your Gamma. And I'm going to be here, watching you grow, teaching you to be strong and kind and authentically yourself, for as long as you'll have me. Marcus appeared in the doorway, having heard Charlotte's word. He smiled at us, this picture of his daughter and mother beginning their own relationship, writing their own story. She knows who her people are, he said softly. She does, I agreed. And we'll make sure she always knows she's loved, respected, and free to become whoever she's meant to be. That night, back in my loft, I stood at my window looking out at the city lights. 2 years ago, I'd been a woman who believed her life was essentially over, that her primary purpose was to serve and support her son, that her own dreams and needs were secondary to family obligations. That woman had been shattered by a text message excluding her from a wedding. But from those shattered pieces, something new had emerged. Someone stronger, more autonomous, more fully herself. Someone who had learned that being a good mother didn't mean sacrificing everything, that love could exist alongside boundaries, that it was never too late to choose yourself. The invitation that never came had led me to Florence, to my book, to a version of myself I might never have discovered otherwise. And now, standing in my own space, living my own life while also being present for my family in healthy ways, I understood something fundamental. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones we're forced to give ourselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.